Welcome to the last video in my series on how to get paid on time as a freelancer. If you haven't seen the first two videos in this series yet, then make sure you click over here to learn about setting a payment schedule and invoicing and receiving money. This series has kindly been sponsored by the service that I use to get paid by clients, TransferWise. They make it really easy to send and receive money internationally with much lower fees and at a much better exchange rate than PayPal's or a bank might have. I talked about them in more detail in the last video, so check that out if you're interested. But right here in this video, we're going to talk about client communication and how to handle any issues that come up, because guess what? If a client enjoys working with you, they're much more likely to pay you on time. In the client-freelancer relationship, just like in any relationship, communication is key. It's especially important too if the client is in another country, as many of mine are. You can't just meet them for coffee and chat about the project. You're dealing most of the time via video calls or via email. So communication, clear communication, is really important. And it's always better to over-communicate than under-communicate. I mentioned in the last video about invoicing that when you send an invoice to a client, you should spell out the important details in an email too. Now this might feel redundant, you might feel like you're repeating yourself because it's all there in the invoice, so they could just look at that. But actually it's just being clear and helpful. This way the client is going to have the important details like the amount and the date it's due right there in the email spelled out for them so that they can see that without having to open the attachment. I do the same thing when I send through proofs to a client. I'll give some background on what they're about to look at in the email, and I'll bold the date that I need to receive feedback by in order to keep on schedule. At the start of the project too, I'll walk my client through my process. I won't just put it in a contract and expect them to read it. I'll point out all the important steps in an email so that we can both be on the same page and know what to expect when working together. Your client will really appreciate these little touches and these extra attention to communication detail. They're going to feel like their project is in really good hands with a professional. Now, I don't want to get too negative, but I do want to give you some advice for what to do if the client puts up some resistance to the process and payment schedule we talked about back in the first video. Here's one common problem you might encounter if your client is a business rather than a sole trader. But we pay net 30 or net 60 or some other time frame. When a client says this, they mean it's their process to pay for a job 30 days after it's been complete, or perhaps they might say on a certain day of the month. Now, I think this is a ridiculous process. It's like going into a store and wanting to buy a jacket and saying, I'm going to pay for this in 30 days. Why? Well, that's just how my finance system works. Now, I've worked in small and big companies, and I know that there's always a way to speed up paying for a service if you really need it. So I don't want you to be intimidated by a company telling you this. Don't get defensive about it or anything. Just explain to them that this is your process, this is how things work, and this is the way things need to be to get the best result for both of you. The way I generally put it is that the first payment is what allows me to block out time in my schedule for them, for their project, to make sure I can help them meet their deadline. And then the final payment coming before the file handover is an indication of the transfer of rights. So once they pay me, that's when they own the rights to the files and they can legally use the work that we've created as is laid out in our contract. Trust me, if they want to work with you, they will find a way to pay you according to your payment schedule. And if they still say they can't, then you've got two options. Either they can wait 30 days for you to start the work or to hand over the files, or you can respectfully decline the opportunity to work with them, because if they're putting up this much of a fuss over paying you fairly on time in a manner in which you've laid out in a contract, then it sounds like they're perhaps not going to be the best client to work with anyway. I find it's generally the final payment that causes more problems than the initial one. Especially as you're approaching a deadline, it might feel really tempting to just send the files to the client before they've paid the invoice, but please don't do this. Stick to your process, and again, make sure you're communicating clearly. Don't hit them with an invoice on the day of the deadline and expect them to make it happen. Make sure you send it in advance and remind them that it'll have to be paid before the files can be delivered, and you'll all be on the same page and everything will be very clear. You often hear stories about clients from hell or creatives complaining about something that their client has said or done. I kind of hate that attitude. I'm not about it. I think that often the issues these creatives are facing are actually communication problems on their behalf, or perhaps they've taken on a client that they really shouldn't have. You've got to remember that a client can't be a client unless you allow them to hire you. So I really want you to take responsibility of this process and control it. If you allow a client to pay you on their 30-day schedule instead of your own, then that's your fault, and you can't complain when they pay you late because you had a chance to control that process and you didn't. The same if you take on a client who seems like they'd be really hard to manage and then they end up requesting a bunch of extra changes, that's your fault too. You allowed them to become a client. I know that's harsh, but it's true. Unfortunately, you probably will face a few of these while you're still learning what qualities to look out for that make for a good client. I know I definitely did. But again, it's important to take responsibility from this and learn from it. And remember, you are allowed to say no to opportunities that come your way if they're not going to be a good fit. For the most part though, a lot of the issues that you might face can be solved with clear communication. If you explain your process and payment schedule really clearly at the start of the project, and then again throughout the project as well, you're going to be much more likely to get paid on time. Remember, just because you do this all the time, that doesn't mean your client knows how it works. So make sure you explain it to them, get them on board, and communicate. This brings us to the end of this video series. I really hope you found it useful. To sum it up, the key steps to getting paid on time are to set up a good payment schedule, to make it really easy for your clients to pay you, and to have open and clear communication. If you've got any questions about this process, then please feel free to leave them down below in the comments. I'd love to help out if I can. Thanks once again to TransferWise for sponsoring this series so I could make it. And please give this video a thumbs up if you did enjoy it and find it useful. Thank you for watching, and go get paid, I guess.